Okay. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Center for Strategic and International Studies. I'm Marti Flacks. I'm the director of the Human Rights Initiative and Khosravi chair in Principled Internationalism. I am delighted to be co-hosting today's event with the Diversity and Leadership and International Affairs program here at CSIS and with the support of our employee resource group on this topic. It's wonderful to see so many of you here in person in the building back at CSIS, and we also welcome those who are joining us via the live stream. We host today's event on the advancement of the rights of LGBTQIA plus people through US foreign policy at an interesting moment, and a moment of great dichotomy. Through the efforts of advocates and the support of some governments, protection of LGBTQIA plus rights around the world is increasing in many places. We've seen several bright spots that stand out as a testament to efforts by those advocates and activists over the past year. In December, Chile's parliament overwhelmingly passed a same-sex marriage bill, the 31st country in the world to do so. And just this month, the Thai cabinet endorsed a significant civil partnership bill. Argentina and Colombia and the US federal government now recognize non-binary identities in their federal and national IDs. And Kuwait's constitutional court recently struck down a law that had been used by security forces to enable the abuse of transgender individuals. But for every bright spot, we see many continued attacks on LGBTQIA plus rights. We see efforts like the one in Ghana to pass new repressive legislation, and we see renewed attacks on activists in places like Turkey and Kazakhstan, and an increase in attacks on transgender people, especially transgender women of color here in the United States. We've also watched leaders around the world in places like Russia, Hungary, and Poland weaponize anti-LGBTQIA plus rhetoric as a wedge issue to motivate and activate a specific set of constituents and to feed an authoritarian political agenda. And the reference by the Russian patriarch in March to gay parades in Ukraine as a justification for the Russian invasion of Ukraine was the peak of this kind of particular political strategy that we have to be aware of. We also know that progress, even in democratic environments, is not irreversible, and that backsliding is real. And that reality was brought home to us just last week with the US Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health, with its immediate implications for reproductive rights and its potential future implications on LGBTQI plus rights. And so for us, the question of how we protect these fundamental rights must inevitably be focused not only on changing the behavior of the most repressive regimes, but protecting the gains that have been made in democracies as well. And it is an integral component of our broader efforts to build more resilient, sustainable democratic systems. LGBTQI plus rights are in many ways a bellwether for broader human rights and democracy issues. And so that's why I'm very excited to that end that we have with us a panel of real experts to talk about how the US government and the advocacy community are thinking about these challenges. What role LGBTQI plus rights play in the global human rights and democracy agenda, and what the road ahead for US foreign policy should look like. Here to facilitate that discussion is my colleague, Hadeil Ali, who serves as the Deputy Director of CSIS's Diversity and Leadership and International Affairs program. She also chairs the think tank Diversity Consortium and is Programming Director for the Race Across the Pond initiative at Women of Color Advancing Peace, Security, and Conflict Transformation, or WCAPS. We're thrilled to have our panelists here today, and I will turn it over to Hadeil to facilitate that conversation. Hadeil.
Thank you so much, Marti. Thank you to the Human Rights Initiative for their partnership on this event, and to the LGBTQI plus ERG for their leadership in this space. I would be remiss if I did not thank the staff who's worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make this event happen, Lauren, Naz, and Madeline. Welcome to all of you to CSIS joining us here in person, and thanks to those of you joining us virtually. It is my honor to be your moderator for today's event on placing LGBTQI plus rights at the Center for US Foreign Policy. To kick off today's event, I'm delighted to introduce Special Envoy Stern. Jessica Stern uses all pronouns and is the US Special Envoy to advance the human rights of LGBTQI plus persons at the US Department of State. Prior to joining the State Department, Special Envoy Stern led Outright Action International, a leading global LGBTQIA+ human rights organization, as its executive director for 10 years. Special Envoy Stern has been a researcher at Human Rights Watch, a Ralph Bunche Fellow at Amnesty International, a program director at the Center for Constitutional Rights, and adjunct associate professor at Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs. Stern is the recipient of numerous honors, including from Attitude Magazine, Crain's New York Business, Gay City News, and the Metropolitan Community Church. Special Envoy Stern, it's an honor to have you here. I'll give you the floor for your opening remarks and sharing with the audience about the first ever interagency report on advancing the human rights of LGBTQIA+ persons around the world.
Thank you so much, Hadeil, and thank you, Marti, for the wonderful opening. Hi, everyone. It's really good to be here today on the last day of Pride Month. And I'm always inspired by people that are not done celebrating the month and will come to an intellectual panel rather than just the pride marches and the parties. As Hadeil said, I'm the U.S. Special Envoy for the advancement of the human rights of LGBTQI+ persons. And this is a really powerful moment if you're concerned with the safety and well-being of LGBTQI+ people around the world. Marti opened with some really excellent examples of progress and challenges for this community. I started my day with a call this morning with a roundtable of LGBTQI human rights defenders in Turkey. And I started my day that way for a number of reasons. The event had been planned for some time, but we had also planned the event because we've been following the developments for the LGBTQI+ community in Turkey with some concern. You may be aware that since 2016, all pride marches have been banned across Turkey, and this year was no exception. Somehow, with some fortitude that is almost unimaginable, LGBTQI+ activists found ways to celebrate, to protest, and come together. But this week in Istanbul, in spite of people's very, very careful efforts to honor their community and themselves, there were arrests of over 350 LGBTQI+ people and their allies as they tried to honor Pride Month and all that it means for them. In the past 8 years, the total number of people arrested at LGBTQI prides in Istanbul was around 100. So this year they've seen a fourfold increase. And I think when we're here in a space like this, whether we're watching online or sitting in this comfortable room, we have to ask ourselves, what would it cost to have this conversation in another place? And what can we all do to make sure that everybody, regardless of the country that they're in, has the right to talk about the human rights, the rule of law, access to health care, education, and well-being for LGBTQI+ people. So Hadeil asked me to start off by talking about what the Biden administration has done since President Biden released his presidential memorandum on LGBTQI+ inclusion in U.S. foreign policy and foreign assistance, which came out February 4th, 2021. My office, working with some incredible people in the audience right now, partnered with the White House to release a one-year report looking at a whole-of-government approach, looking at the efforts that we've made from USAID, from the Peace Corps, from the Department of Treasury, from the Department of State and beyond, to make sure that we are developing targeted programs to include LGBTQI+ people in everything that we do, and mainstreaming this vulnerable group of people in everything from the policy level to the speeches to the behind-the-scenes conversations. And this is really important, and this directive comes from the top. As President Biden's interim national security strategy states, quote, when we defend the equal rights of all people, women and girls, LGBTQI+ individuals, members of indigenous communities, people with disabilities, people of every ethnic background and religion, we help ensure that those rights are protected for our own children in America. And so I bring up this point to emphasize that domestic and foreign policy are two sides of the same coin, right? So we have to fight for human rights in all contexts. The report that I'm sure everyone here has read, all 123 pages of it, is really, really important. To the best of my own knowledge, it's the first time any government has ever released a report documenting its efforts to include LGBTQI people in foreign policy and foreign assistance. That's a big deal, right? And you can imagine why we've done it. We've done it to be transparent about our efforts and also to lay a marker down for ourselves, in essence, to take inventory of the work done in just 1 year, but also to take stock so that we know the work that still needs to be done. I'll just say maybe one more thing, maybe just one example from the report. There are lots of examples of progress. There are some examples that I think of as, relatively modest, but if we want to change foreign policy, the way we do it is through lots of small initiatives coming together. So I'll give you one example just to show you how important it is to do this work. The Peace Corps thought, well, if we want to have a more diverse set of people in the Peace Corps, we need to ensure that our recruitment practices are diverse. So the Peace Corps convened a special Transgender Recruitment Day to ensure that transgender people know they are welcomed in the Peace Corps, they are wanted in the Peace Corps, and that if there's a transgender person serving in the Peace Corps, they're not alone, right? There's a cohort of people. So that's an example of one tangible thing that makes inclusion happen. And then I'll give you an example of something at a policy level that I'm enormously proud of. At the Department of State, we released the first ever US passport which has the X gender marker. We did so on April 11th of this year. Had you heard about this? Okay, some people shaking their heads. Well, now you know, and now you can tell your friends, but this really matters because the X gender marker means that we recognize more than the binary categories of male and female. So X stands for unidentified or other, and it's a really concrete way of saying that everyone should have access to legal identity before the law, and that our government is catching up with the lived realities of LGBTQI plus people. So there are many more examples, but I'll leave it there because I've given you a taste.
Thank you, Special Envoy Stern. And as you mentioned, the transparency in the reporting as well. And I think one of the aims of this report is hopefully to inspire other governments to promote human rights of LGBTQIA plus person and find ways to integrate their needs in foreign policy. What were your goals with the release of this report? And do you think those goals have been accomplished?
Well, Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman launched the report for us. And she said, this is not a victory lap. And I think that's really important when you ask that question, Hadeil. Are the goals accomplished? You can never really finish your work for LGBTQI rights until homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, interphobia, and all related forms of intolerance are eradicated. Our work will never be done. But part of the reason why this report matters so much is because there are 70 countries around the world that still criminalize homosexual status or conduct. Now, sometimes we hear that number and it almost becomes background noise because for those of us that follow this work, we've heard it so many times. But when I started doing this work 20 years ago, that number was around 90. And in the last 6 years alone, 9 countries have decriminalized homosexual status or conduct, which means that the global trend is towards decriminalization. And it is not limited to one kind of country or one region of the world. The trend is towards the recognition of the fundamental dignity of LGBTQI plus people. And I want to say that, and I especially want to say that to an audience of Americans, because I think we're also very concerned with the backlash and the rollback on our rights, and the ways that particular parts of the LGBTQI plus community, as Marti was referring to, are targeted. But I want to say that once you sort of have begun the process, Hadeil, of recognizing that LGBTQI plus people are entitled to equal rights, you just can't go back. So the trajectory of progress is on our side.
Thank you so much, Special Envoy Stern. And this is a perfect timing to bring into this conversation Senior Coordinator Gilliam. Welcome to CSIS. Gilliam uses his pronouns and is the Senior LGBTQIA plus Coordinator at USAID. Jay serves as the agency's lead to elevate issues concerning LGBTQIA+ and other people of diverse genders and sexualities. In his role, he works to meaningfully integrate LGBTQIA+ people into USAID's inclusive development programs, policies, research, and training. And most recently, he was the Engagement and Communications Advisor at the Center for Education at USAID. Welcome, Senior Coordinator Gilliam, and I'll give you the floor to share your opening remarks.
Great, thank you for that really great introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, and for those joining online, hello. My name is Jay Gilliam. I use pronouns he, him, his, and yes, I'm the USAID Senior LGBTQI+ Coordinator. First of all, I wanted to say thank you to CSIS for hosting this event, for putting a spotlight on global LGBTQI+ issues in the terms of talking about the human rights and the development, the inclusive development of LGBTQI+ persons around the world. I also want to go back to Marti's remarks at the opening and just say that we are also following the recent events that have been very troubling for everyone. And at the outside, I want to just make clear that with USAID, we will continue to prioritize partnering with governments, private sector, international and non-governmental organizations to really work to improve the health outcomes, including advancing sexual and reproductive health and rights. So this means that our programs and our policies are not going to be changing despite the Dobbs decision that has been made here. I also want to acknowledge that, as we all know, this decision not only impacts women, right? It impacts all who can be pregnant. That includes trans men, non-binary people, and other gender diverse individuals. And so we all just have to keep in mind that, those rights that are being taken away here, we have to be mindful that they have reverberations for all of us around the world. But thankfully, we are part of an administration, Jessica and I, where LGBTQI+ rights are human rights, full stop. And Administrator Power, who leads USAID, also has committed to advancing LGBTQI+ inclusive development. But for some of you, you might be saying, what does that mean exactly? Well, inclusive development is really an equitable development approach. It's built on understanding that every individual and community, those coming from diverse identities and experiences, everyone is instrumental in the transformation of their own societies. Their engagement through the development process just leads to better development outcomes. So as Senior LGBTQI+ Coordinator, I'm working with my colleagues around the world, with our implementing partners, and hopefully with all of you to be really advancing this ambitious vision. Inclusive development means integrating LGBTQI+ equities in all of the work that we are doing at USAID. It means making USAID more accessible to LGBTQI+ persons in country, both leaders, advocates, organizations, and those in the community. It means making sure that the research that we are supporting is getting to actionable outcomes. And it also ensures that we, as USAID, continue to be a model, a leader in this space. And in today's conversation, we hope to be able to share some of the ways that we've been advancing LGBTQI+ inclusive development. I want to say thank you to Jessica and her colleagues at the State Department for the Herculean effort of getting the interagency report out. We were really proud to be able to profile a number of examples of what LGBTQI+ inclusive development looks like. One example of that is from the Dominican Republic, where we have a partnership with the UN Development Program, UNDP, called Being LGBTI in the Caribbean. And through that program, there's been a number of highlights and successes, but two that we highlighted in the report were one, the launch of a national LGBTQI+ survey in the Dominican Republic, which helps us understand what the community looks like, what their needs and challenges are. And another from that program is an intersex report that really documents the lived realities of people in the region of the Caribbean and in Latin America. And those two things are just examples of the ways that we are really trying to advance LGBTQI+ inclusive development. I also want to mention that a core component of this work includes working with local partners, local LGBTQI+ communities. And Administrator Power has made advancing localization efforts a priority of the way that she wants to advance development. And I see these things working hand in hand with each other, and that the best way that we can be advancing LGBTQI plus lives, livelihoods, is by working closely on the ground with partners in those places. You know, I'm going to quote Administrator Power, who says, "If we truly want to make aid inclusive, local voices need to be the center of everything we do. We've got to tap into the knowledge of local communities and their lived experiences. Otherwise, we risk reinforcing the systemic inequities that are already in place." And so we are working with our colleagues in the agency who are advancing efforts in the localization front to help understand the ways that those efforts can positively impact the work that we're doing to advance LGBTQI plus inclusive development. And in fact, just today, I published a blog on our workwithusaid.org site that really talks about the importance of working with local partners in advancing LGBTQI plus inclusive development. And so I'm just going to stop there. And I know that we're going to be continuing our conversation more, but that's just a couple of the highlights.
Perfect, thank you. And let me ask you a follow-up question based on the remarks that you've made in the report. USAID has clearly articulated its intense efforts in ensuring that LGBTQIA people are able to both access and benefit from USAID's program. You mentioned Administrator Power's statement after the release of this report, highlighting the important progress that USAID has made through its commitment to inclusive development policies, and also highlighted the catalytic power of partnerships, which is at the core of what USAID does. Senior Coordinator Gilliam, can you tell us a little bit more about how you have arrived to this point? What is contributing to this increased prioritization that we're seeing?
Sure, yeah. Well, I think one thing is the incredible staff that we have at USAID. We have a network of focal points across DC in our bureaus here at USAID, as well as in missions around the world. And those LGBTQI plus focal points are really the heart and soul of how we get this done. You know, at USAID, a lot of our work happens and is centered in country, and so we are really dependent on those local focal points to do that. And it's been my priority to help re-engage with those focal points. Obviously, in the last administration, it was very difficult to be working on these issues if you were committed to them, but didn't really have political leadership to do that. And so I've been working to re-engage with those local staff, whether they are Foreign Service officers or Foreign Service nationals, and giving them a place to come together to talk about the work that we are doing to advance this, to share lessons learned, to share successes and challenges. And so that's been one way that we have been able to do this. I think another way is in terms of focusing not only in certain places or regions around the world, but focusing around sectors and taking a sectoral approach to how we are working on LGBTQI plus inclusive development. Last year, we worked to put out 2 sectoral guidances for our staff, as well as our implementing partners in the education space, as well as in the resilience and food security spaces. And those sectoral guidances really provided a spotlight on how do you really integrate LGBTQI plus persons into those spaces. In the education space, how do you take into account the challenges, the needs of learners, of administrators, of teachers who are LGBTQI plus, and really ensure that they are seen, that they are in an environment that is inclusive of their needs to be able to advance their work. And so we're really excited that we are continuing to build on those sectoral guidances. And my discussions with other donors from governments, from the private sector, they're really excited to see that we're bringing in a development lens into this space. And so it's not only talking about the human rights needs, but it's talking about the development angle in terms of advancing LGBTQI plus livelihoods. And this year we're going to be working to create new sectoral guidances in the spaces of humanitarian assistance and in economic empowerment and livelihoods. And we know in both of those areas, in my talks with advocates from around the world, and as all of us know from the crises that are happening from Afghanistan to Ukraine to many, many other places, that humanitarian assistance crises are often the spaces where LGBTQI plus folks are getting left out. And so we need to find ways to ensure their protection ensure their needs are being met. And similarly with economic empowerment and livelihoods, we know that for a number of reasons, LGBTQI plus folks do not have the same opportunities to access credit, to be part of formal job sectors. And so that is another focus that we really want to be working on.
Thank you. And thank you both to Special Envoy Stern and Senior Coordinator Gilliam for bringing the perspective of the administration and setting the stage for this conversation. Part of the goal of this discussion is also to bring the perspective of leading practitioners and civil society advocates and activists. So I'm honored to welcome both Dr. Chloe Schwenke and Stephen Chukwumah to the conversation here today. Dr. Schwenke, she uses she, hers pronouns and is the founder and president of the Center for Values in International Development. Her career has focused on LGBTQIA+ issues, applied ethics, inclusive development, gender equality and equity, democracy governance, and human rights. Chloe's development practitioner career has covered project experience over 40 countries and 15 years of residence in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Under the Obama administration, she served as the first and to date only openly transgender political appointee at USAID as senior advisor on democracy, human rights, and governance in sub-Saharan Africa and on LGBTQI+ issues globally. Welcome, Dr. Schwenke.
Thank you.
Joining us as well is Mr. Stephen Chukwumah, who is a policy advocate and uses him, his pronouns with the Council for Global Equality, an organization dedicated to advancing an American foreign policy that is inclusive of sexual orientation and gender identity. An Nigerian-born advocate and strategist, Stephen has spent an extensive time and experience and expertise in movement building, policy, and fundraising. He has previously worked as a youth advisor to the UN Population Fund and founded the first youth-led organization in Eastern Nigeria to address discrimination and abuse targeting sexual minority youths and other public health issues, including HIV. It's an honor to have both of you here. And let me start with you, Stephen. As a leading practitioner and policy advocate, what were your reactions to both the report and the statements made by Special Envoy Stern and Senior Coordinator Gilliam?
Great, thank you for having me and for this opportunity. So I think just before the conversation started, the opening remarks talked about the progress that has happened when it comes to LGBTQ issues, but I think also it pointed out some of the challenges that are still happening, some examples by the Special Envoy talking about Turkey. But outside of that, what we're seeing is that issues that affect LGBTQ people have left like the human rights discussion, or rather, it's gotten beyond the human rights discussion to include things like humanitarian assistance, to include things like also providing support for LGBTQ people around livelihoods and economic participation. And so I think something that was also very interesting to me that the Special Envoy said was that, you know, LGBTQ people would have freedom when we can do away with homophobia. And I think it is true, but I think beyond that, what we're seeing is that it's important for LGBTQ people to also be a part of our society in a meaningful way, addressing their well-being, you know, moving from just, you know, making laws that are welcoming, but also ensuring that they have the skills to participate fully in the economy. And this is very important because if you think about what we've experienced during COVID and the pandemic, we've seen like a huge exclusion of LGBTQ people in terms of provisions that governments were providing. So say, for instance, in many countries where governments were able to provide financial assistance or other forms of assistance, LGBTQ folks were hugely excluded. And so these things are very important issues that I think, you know, and that while they were talking about it, I was really thinking about we need to move beyond just words, but actions. And I think Jay also speaks very well about localization, that ultimately whatever we're doing, what matters is the positive impacts that LGBTQ people all over the world are able to experience. So moving from just, you know, the will to do something, the research, but to actually doing something is what I've actually picked from all of these conversations.
Thank you so much for your perspective. And Dr. Schwenke, you are an international development practitioner, a human rights advocate, and activist. What were your reactions?
Well, I mean, it's wonderful to be here with this particular crowd. And by the way, thank you all for being here today. Particularly with Special Envoy, my dear friend Jessica. This is a lady that comes with some real traction. She's been in civil society. Her voice is strong. Her voice is motivational. She's a woman who cares deeply. Wow, what a great person to have at the State Department. What I would like to see us do to support her, and I'm looking at this in the context of the fact that she has to go out into the world as the representative of our country at the highest level in this space and advocate for the human dignity of all people in the LGBTQI community and beyond. She also is aware that in this country, that's not what's going down right now in many states. There are enormous levels of pushback. There are deeply concerning trends in this country that really challenge that notion of the dignity of people like me, for instance. That's not okay, but she carries our flag. So what can we do to support her? Well, one of the things we can do to support her is stop thinking about us and them. We're all developing countries. And to that end, to be able to bring the strength of civil society here, what used to be Eagle Herc, Outright Action International, and organizations like that, to be solidly behind the work that she's trying to do to represent us all in the world, to bring their energy, their drive, their knowledge, their experience, and their care to the work that she's doing. So I really, really am very encouraged to have her in this position, and what she said is so important, but we've got to back her. I'm also really happy Jay's a friend of mine from years ago, and we've been friends ever since. Jay's, again, the right person, because you already heard what he's just saying. This is not just, as important as it is, about protecting and promoting the rights of LGBTQI persons. This is about their lives. This is about the quality of their lives, what we as ethicists call a truly human life. If we're going to get to a place where there is actually a truly human life for any marginalized group, but we're a particular target. I don't know, people get freaked out by people like me. So be it. They have to have a life. They have to have a job. They have to have access to healthcare. They have to have access to education, you name it, the stuff they are not getting right now. We have encouraged for years LGBTQI people to get out there and advocate for their rights. Necessary, but not sufficient. People have to be recognized and respected as human beings, as people of universal human dignity. And that's what Jay is talking about when he's talking about bringing out a fully realized development initiative, bringing actual education, health, jobs, housing, et cetera, things that USAID has been doing forever. Let's bring them to people like us all around the world. There's no us and them. So I'm really gratified. We need to give them money. We need to give them, actually not that much money. There's not that many of us in the world. It's a low-hanging fruit to get there. So that would be a really big opportunity for USAID, State Department, others to just say, let's break free some money, because we could have a phenomenal impact in transforming the lives, the quality of life, the truly human life of people who are LGBTQI and their allies.
Thank you, Dr. Schwenke, and thank you for highlighting the importance of well-being and also the importance of allies and the work that we need to be doing as well. Stephen, your organization, the Council for Global Equality, put out a report card on the human rights of LGBTQIA plus people in 2020 for the Summit of Democracy. Could you tell us a little bit more about what went into the creation of this report, and what do you want us as readers to take away from it?
Great, thank you. So the report card provides a concise measurement for the core human rights protection of LGBTIQ people using 3 dimensions: social and basic rights, and provision from violence. The idea is to link democracy with the full citizenship participation for LGBTIQ people. Although the citizenship framework in the overall democracy discussion is new, it's very critical, because it highlights the importance of ensuring that minority groups like LGBTQ people have access. It also links to the parallel conversation around economic empowerment and participation. I think also what the report card also highlights is that marginalized groups in democracy settings actually suffer greatly, and so it's important to pay attention to that. For instance, trans folks in a society where they're not recognized would not be able to exercise their full rights to participate in the electoral system because of lack of recognition of the right identity card. I think also something that is very important for folks to take away from the report card is that almost all democracies, excluding Malta, have a long way to go in ensuring the full citizenship participation of LGBTIQ people from a human rights perspective and from access perspective. And all of this is very important because, again, if you go back to what we experienced during COVID, arguably COVID is still very much around. LGBTIQ people suffered the most, and you can see this from a lot of the reports that came out during the height of the COVID challenge. I think also you see LGBTQ people increasingly fleeing undemocratic societies and countries and are confronting new challenges when they come to the border, for instance. Thank God that the Supreme Court has actually recently removed the remaining Mexico policy, but that speaks to some of the challenges that even when LGBTIQ folks flee dangerous situations, they come to a place like America, they still have those kinds of challenges. So I think the report cards in general help us sort of unpack the importance of these conversations when it comes to democracy and full human rights enjoyment for LGBTIQ people.
Thank you. And if you haven't had the chance to take a look at the report card, I highly encourage you to do so. Dr. Schwenke, you recently published earlier this year an article titled Pride for Everyone, where you mentioned Molly Melching and the Tostan Community Empowerment Project in Senegal as an example of a successful effort to promote the thinking around female genital cutting. You highlight in your article the idea of a shared commitment towards mutual respect and mutual dignity, just as you mentioned earlier. What else, in your opinion, other than starting a dialogue, can civil society leaders and international development practitioners do to champion a human dignity for all?
Yeah, we need to do a lot more than start a dialogue, for sure. There's too much talking out there already. What we need to do is get under the talking to see what are we actually talking about. That's why, my particular organization as ethicists, as much as it would seem odd for ethicists to say it's not about human rights, we're saying that only in the sense that human rights are an indicator of universal human dignity. And to the degree that people are actually experiencing universal human dignity is going to be made manifest in the way they lead their lives and the way that others allow them to lead their lives. So we're not talking about changing a dialogue, we're talking about changing a discourse. And a discourse is an exchange of ideas. It's a way of thinking. And what Molly Melching and Tostan did took a long time, but what they did in Senegal and now 8 other countries in West Africa was to open the door, not to specifically female genital cutting. That wasn't where she started. She started with a conversation about dignity, with a discourse about dignity, and people locally rose to that discourse, claimed that leadership for themselves, and by a matter of just natural progression, what were some of the biggest challenges to the experience of universal human dignity in Senegal? Female genital cutting. They got there on their own, not because Molly said so. We need to change the way we think. And we're doing that to some extent. I'm going to do a shout out to Chorus International, a faith-informed organization. I see Roselle here right now. One of the challenges for our own international civil society that's working in development spaces is that they are on board now with diversity, equity, and inclusion, but mostly only for their offices here. Well, we can't do that for those field offices. I mean, come on. That's criminalized there. Don't talk to me about that, dear. We don't have the money for that. It's not in the budget. I have heard that way too many times. Chorus International, a faith-informed group, formerly Lutheran World Relief, is saying no. We have to have consistency. We can't have 2 sets of moral standards here and there. We can't have it instantly. We've got to be pragmatic about this, but we're going to move in that direction. That's leadership. That's really strong leadership. So I'm looking for that kind of leadership in civil society here to support leadership in civil society around the world. I think it's absolutely possible. I'm looking, as I said before, for more money for Jay. And I'm looking for us to get behind this in a really serious way, to have a discourse, a change of thinking and ideas. Absolutely a place for human rights, for sure. But let's focus deeper. Let's focus on what drives change. What drives change is a space where we can talk about things beyond human rights, things like authenticity, like care, like compassion, like love. I mean, what a remarkable example lesbian, gay, and bisexual people bring, and a lot of trans too, to the notion of love, to as champions of love. What better thing can you be involved in than that? Human rights doesn't have space for that very easily, but moral principles of human dignity do. We can talk about love. We can talk about authenticity. We can talk about compassion, care, empathy, all those great, powerful things that drive change. That's what I'm hoping to see us move towards.
Thank you, Dr. Schwenke.
Can you pass me a tissue?
And thank you for highlighting that shared language of empathy, love, and dignity. As we have seen here and from the report, the administration has clearly made some significant strides in terms of its commitment to uplifting and protecting the LGBTQIA+ community. Special Envoy Stern, as you mentioned, we have done a lot, but we still have a lot more to go. What steps do you think should be taken to ensure that this commitment is turned into concrete and sustainable action?
Well, I could listen to smart civil society leaders like Chloe and Stephen forever. I was sort of lulled into a state of complacency. I was like, yes, they have the answers. There was just so much wisdom in what you both said, so I just really want to thank you. I don't have enough time to quote everything you said, but the concept that Chloe introduced of a truly human life is profound, right? That's really beautiful. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, Chloe, you know, the State Department also has a robust grant-making program for LGBTQI civil society around the world. In fact, Chloe, if you didn't know, the State Department runs the Global Equality Fund. Does everybody know what the Global Equality Fund is? There's so many nerds here, like half the room shook your head. That's amazing. The Global Equality Fund is a public-private partnership of governments, including the US and private actors, to support LGBTQI rights organizations on the front lines for justice around the world. And this is our 10th anniversary year, and we just crossed the $103 million mark, right? No. It's not for us, it's for the movement. I mean, you know, to Hadeil's question, what are the steps we need to translate this kind of commitment into action? It's many things, but I will always say that one thing that LGBTQI human rights defenders need is funding, because it costs money to turn on the lights, to buy a computer, to pay staff salaries, and money is not the only answer. You know, as Stephen was saying, you need an intersectional analysis, but money can accelerate the pace of change. And money is not equally distributed to all human rights movements. And LGBTQI+ people are often shut out, whether it's from access to funding to support their human rights movements or access to funding in terms of like fair and equitable livelihoods. I'll give you a couple of quick examples of what steps should be taken beyond funding. One is training. I think, you know, one of the things that appealed to me about coming to CSIS is the idea that this is a foreign policy space. And I think the respect for LGBTQI+ people should be a nonpartisan issue, right? We should all be able to agree that discrimination and violence is wrong, full stop. It doesn't matter who we're talking about. So I think we need to do more training for foreign policy and foreign assistance professionals. A second recommendation is we need more leadership on these issues. So I never miss the opportunity to say, you know, articulate your support for countering discrimination targeting LGBTQI+ people and all other marginalized and vulnerable groups. Sometimes it takes just one other person to make space for you to feel like your full self. And we certainly need people that are in charge of budgets and hiring and have important positions in policy to demonstrate that leadership. And then last but not least, I'll just give you one concrete example. My office is spearheading a rulemaking process, which is the kind of, you know, deep government work that is incredibly important. And the idea behind this rulemaking process is to ban discrimination on any grounds, including on the grounds of sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, sex characteristics, but also race, gender, religion, disability, and beyond, in all US government foreign assistance, including services, contracts, and grants, and supplies. So I think there are many things we can do. We just need more of us doing it.
Yeah. Thank you, Special Envoy Stern. Senior Coordinator Gilliam, Special Envoy Stern mentioned funding, training, leadership. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to what one of the things Stephen said, which was around accountability and the scorecard that they have created for the Summit for Democracy. I want all of you to hold us accountable for what we put into the report. Check back with us next year when we are rolling out the new one. As Jessica has mentioned before, it should be longer. It should have new stuff in it. It should have some check marks of things that we've accomplished that we said we were going to do in them. And also to utilize the scorecard that CGE has put together. If you are from another place or you're engaging with other governments, hold them accountable for their actions and what they're doing. I think that is incredibly important. Everyone has mentioned we all could use more resources, and we highlighted in the report that at USAID, our LGBTQI+ portfolio is one of the smallest in the agency. And so, yes, more resources are always helpful, not only helpful for our standalone LGBTQI+ programming that we're doing, but for the ways that we could help resource and accelerate integration into other sectors with our colleagues. And that leads me into the third point. Just in terms of as we are working to accelerate integration into various parts of our development work, it reminds me that we all have a place that we could be advocating for this issue. Similar to what Jessica just mentioned, wherever you are, there's probably a way that you could be supporting global LGBTQI+ work if you are working here in the foreign policy space, right? And so we are doing it from the development side. Jessica and her State Department colleagues are doing it in the diplomatic side. Our civil society partners are doing it from the outside, pushing us to be doing more. Our think tank colleagues, right, are writing pieces, are doing research to really help bolster the argument around the need for support. And so just remember that we all can be doing something in this space to promote and advance the lives of LGBTQI+ folks all around the world.
Thank you. I have one last question to both of you before we turn it over to the audience for questions. And I'll start with you, Dr. Schwenke. How can policymakers and civil society work together on this issue to ensure that the progress continues to be made past the duration of this current administration?
Well, policymakers need to stop making policy until they listen. So that's the main takeaway here. And civil society here and in developing countries and we're all developing countries, they have a lot to say. They have stories to share. They have narratives that we need to listen to. We need to unpack all these letters because they're all different narratives. They have different aspiration, needs, and priorities. We need to take recognition of that. And people like Jay and his organization on the development side need to be able to respond with that level of nuance and particularity to what a trans woman needs compared to what a gay man needs compared to an intersex. And you guys are well on the way of doing that, which is a really heartening, thing to do. But we don't actually easily, we say LGBTQIA+, it's not easy. But we have to take that apart. We have to really, listen, learn, and understand from people who are LGBTQIA+.
Thank you. And Stephen?
Yeah, sure. No, thank you for this opportunity. And just to say, I think, it's very important to see the community as a strong partner, an equal partner, not just a partner that, and this is mainly important for folks here, sort of engaging with folks in developing countries, to your point, we're all developing countries, but sort of understanding that LGBTQ folks, they know what the issues are and they have to be listened to. They have to actually be given center stage to actually talk about their issues and empowered. And that the resources we're talking about, that those resources actually get to the community, not that the resources are spent on bureaucratic arrangements and other things that take out all the money and then it doesn't get to the community. I think also ensuring that we understand that it's not enough to change the laws, right? Like when we talk about well-being, we need to talk about what that really means, that LGBTQ people just saying that, okay, they're no longer criminalized in a particular country does not mean their lives is now, okay. They have other issues as well, like the ability to either get married, have kids are also concerns. And the ability to even have a decent job can also be one of the bigger issues, or to move freely from one country to the other, to enjoy their basic rights as human beings, I feel like are also issues that partners, policymakers need to also pay attention to, and not just this one single-sided idea of how to achieve LGBTQ rights.
Thank you. We have time for one question from the live audience. My colleagues, Catherine and Sophia in the back, will have mics. If you can share your name and affiliation and a brief question, hopefully we might be able to get a second question. So, perfect, right here.
Do I need a mic?
Yes, my colleague in the back here will hand you the mic.
Thank you. Hello? Okay. So my name is Sasha. I'm with the School of Public Service, who's visiting you guys today. And my question is, the title of this talk is something along the lines of putting LGBT rights at the center of US foreign policy. And my question is, given that, as was heard in the introduction and throughout the talk, about how certain countries, a lot of countries around the world, things have been getting worse, right? And two of the examples were Poland and Turkey. And both of these countries are pretty integral NATO allies. So what I was wondering is, how do we balance trying to put LGBT rights at the center of US foreign policy with maintaining the unity of NATO, which is so important right now with the Russian invasion?
Special envoy.
Questions, and then we can try.
Were there other questions? We can try to take a second one, Rachel.
No way I'm getting out of here without asking a question. Good afternoon. My name is Rachel Thomas. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I had the extreme honor to work under Special Envoy Stern at the State Department, and I am a Navy veteran. My question is, we've talked a lot about LGBTQI plus rights, and we've talked a little bit about the intersectionality of class, age, things of that nature. However, a lot of times within state and the US government, there are so many executive orders that are talking about racial justice, gender identity, LGBTQIA+, and there seems to be a lot of infighting that still happens within, I don't know as much for civil society, but there's quite a bit within the US government, unfortunately, still. For both Jessica and Jay, how do you see the way forward to make sure that we're not just siloing these issues as per one or two executive orders and actually making sure that we're taking that intersectional approach? Thank you.
Thank you. Special Envoy Stern, do you want to start with your response?
Sasha, that was a hard question. I was with Secretary Blinken about a week and a half ago, and he was asked a very similar question by a reporter. And the way he answered is by saying that LGBTQI rights are one central component of US foreign policy, but not the only central component. And that when he looks at the competing demands that the US government grapples with, he takes into account national security interests, economic interests, access to food, and human rights. And I think we always have to think in a holistic framework if we're going to be effective advocates for the human rights of all people, because LGBTQI people also need access to food. LGBTQI people also need financial sustainability. Where I think we sometimes get it wrong is that we think there's a hierarchy of priorities and human rights come at the bottom. And actually, I know these people so well and respect them so much, I would say they're actually all intersectional. I don't actually think you can have national security without also having human rights. And I think we sort of have to flip the narrative of thinking that the human rights component is the disposable component, and rather move it, as I think everyone was saying, from the margins to the center, and say, actually, a better way to have stronger economies, stronger nations, is by recognizing and respecting the human rights of all. That's the way forward, and that's the world we should be fighting for. On Rachel's question, Rachel Thomas, formidable, if you don't know her. So Rachel said, sometimes there's competition among executive orders, there's even infighting, meaning the pitting of marginalized groups against one another. So she asked, what's the way forward? I'm really happy to be in a very special cohort at the State Department. We call ourselves the Equality Avengers. And I'm hoping that we don't get into copyright trouble with Marvel. But I work in lockstep with the Special Representative on racial discrimination. I work in lockstep with those working on global women's issues, on disability rights, Sarah Minkara, and other marginalized groups, including those targeted on the basis of religion or faith. And I think that really flips the script, right? Instead of pitting us as against each other, as though you can only work on disability or you can work on racism, actually it makes a stronger, more coherent argument. I think that's the only way forward, right? I have much more to say about that, but you know what I think.
Did any of the other panelists want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to what Jessica said. One for Sasha, part of the reasoning behind the Summit for Democracy is to bring together democracies to say that, yes, this is a good form of government, that we should be supporting each other, and also that it's really important that we have strong democracies. And the president has said strong democracies are inclusive democracies. And so all of us have work to do in this space, whether we're democratic governments, authoritarian governments, authoritarian leaning, right? And so we can have disagreements with friends. We can get our friends to do better. We can get our friends to make us do better, right? We have a lot of work to be doing here. I know that I've had conversations with other governments to say, like, how can you be telling us we need to be doing stronger when what we see happening here in the US is embarrassing, frankly, right? And so we often go into those conversations with humility, saying, yes, we know that there is a lot of work that we need to be doing at home, but also that we have privilege and resources to be sharing, to be supporting local advocates in the work that they want to be doing to bring about LGBTQI plus equality. So I would just add that part. And then to Rachel's question, I think similarly with the Equality Avengers at State Department, our LGBTQI plus portfolio is actually housed in what is called the Inclusive Development Hub, which works with a lot of groups in vulnerable situations and marginalized populations. And so that there are other teams and coordinators that are working on issues with persons with disabilities, with indigenous peoples, with children in adversity around a number of issues. And one of the things that we often are talking about is exactly what you said, Rachel, not necessarily working in a silo, but finding those intersectional approaches to this work, finding ways of speaking to all of our colleagues so that they understand when we're going to them to talk about global LGBTQI plus issues. Yes, we might be focusing on that, but we want them to understand the broad breadth of inclusive development that they should be thinking about. And as we're talking about LGBTQI plus issues, they should also be thinking around, okay, what does this mean for persons with disabilities in the program and activities that we're supporting? What does this mean for indigenous peoples? And so that is something that we are working on as well.
Thank you. And unfortunately, we are almost at time. I wish we could continue the conversation longer, but on behalf of CSIS, the Human Rights Initiative, and the Diversity in Leadership and International Affairs Project, I'd like to thank each one of you for joining us here today, for contributing critically to this work. Thank you to all of you who have joined us here in person. Special thanks also to those tuning in online. I hope you all find ways to continue to engage with our work at the center. Like Special Envoy Stern mentioned at the beginning, today is the last day of Pride Month, but I hope you all find ways to continue elevating this work all year round. That is certainly a priority for us at CSIS. So thank you so much for joining us. For those of you here in person, we will now transition to the second part of this event. You can join us right outside these doors for a reception hour. Thank you.